It was a night etched in my memory, one I wish I could erase but can never seem to forget. My mother, slumped on the couch, drunk as usual, radiated an energy that was nothing short of dangerous. The scent of stale whiskey clung to her breath, and her eyes, glazed and wild, burned with the kind of rage that only alcohol could fuel. Something had set her off. I don't know exactly what. Maybe it was my dad refusing her demands, like so many times before. Maybe it was something small, some insignificant comment he'd made, but to her it was always a betrayal, an attack. Whatever it was, she was furious. The house felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of her anger. Then, the scream. It was like the crack of thunder, sudden and deafening, shattering the fragile silence of the night. "Fetch me a knife," she screamed at us, her voice slurred but venomous. We froze, my siblings and I, 3 scared small children, ages ranging between 6 and 10, each of us trapped in our own personal nightmare. I could feel my heart pounding, the blood rushing to my ears, drowning out all rational thought. I had no idea what she was going to do, but the terror in her voice made it clear that this wasn't a request. She was demanding compliance, and she was furious if we didn't act fast enough. "Do it now!" she bellowed, as if the very air around her was thick with tension. I glanced at my younger brother, his face pale with fear, his wide eyes looking to me for guidance. But what was I supposed to say? What was I supposed to do? In that moment we were all frozen, paralyzed by her wrath. We had never been taught how to stand up to her when she was in this state, not when she was drunk, not when she was like this. The atmosphere was suffocating, the kind of atmosphere that made you question whether you were about to witness something you would never be able to unsee. My poor brother, barely able to form a coherent sentence, was the first to react. With trembling hands, he turned and bolted toward the kitchen, our minds racing, but our bodies moving on autopilot. He was terrified of her, but more than that, he was terrified of what would happen if he didn't obey. We didn't know how to say no to her, not when she was like this, not when she was screaming, and we were too young to understand that sometimes, even as children, it was okay to refuse. So he fetched the knife, as if doing so would somehow calm the storm brewing in her eyes, as if somehow it would make everything better. But we all knew, deep down, that she didn't really mean it. She wasn't suicidal, not in any real sense. That much, at least, was clear. This wasn't an attempt to end her life. It was a twisted, cruel performance, a manipulation, a way for her to control us, to make sure we understood just how serious she was, just how much power she held over our fragile, innocent lives. The knife wasn't for her. It was for us. It was a weapon to strike fear into our hearts, a tool she used to make her anger more real, more terrifying, something we couldn't ignore, something we couldn't escape. As I watched my brother return with the knife, my chest tightened. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to tell her how wrong this was, to beg her to stop tormenting us, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was watch as she brandished the knife, as she screamed about how we didn't love her, how no one cared, how she was worthless, all while drunkenly swaying on the couch. And yet I knew the truth in my heart. This wasn't about ending her life. It wasn't about any of that. It was about her needing us to see her pain, her need to make us take sides, to prove to us that she was the one who had been wronged. It wasn't about us. It was never about us. She didn't care what we felt, what we thought, or how deeply we were scarred by her outbursts. She wanted us to pick a side, to align ourselves with her, to believe that her anger and pain justified what she was doing. But we were just kids, terrified and powerless, too young to understand why she couldn't just let go of whatever grievance she had that night, too young to know that we shouldn't have been forced to bear the weight of her emotional chaos. It's been years, but I still remember the hollow emptiness in the pit of my stomach that night, the sick feeling of helplessness that washed over me as I watched her hold the knife, the twisted thrill she seemed to get from our fear. Alcoholism isn't a joke, and suicidal behavior isn't something to take lightly, but that night, no, that wasn't about either of those things. It was about control. It was about her trying to make us see her as a victim, as someone who needed us, as someone who had no other way of communicating her pain but through manipulation and terror. And for so many years after, we were left with the aftermath. Terrified, confused, trying to process the weight of her actions. We shouldn't have had to. We shouldn't have been part of her twisted theatrics, but she forced us into that role, and I'll carry that memory and all the pain it brings with me forever. It's been a while since I shared that story. I've gone through a lot of emotions in the time since, and as much as I wish I could just close that chapter of my life, I know I can't. The effects of what happened that night, and all the other nights that came before and after, are still with me. Some days they feel like they happened yesterday, and other days it feels like they happened in another lifetime. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on that night. It still haunts me, even if I can't fully explain why. I've talked to a therapist about it, trying to unravel how the terror of that moment has become woven into the fabric of who I am, the manipulation, the power play. It was so ingrained in my childhood, I didn't even realize how toxic and damaging it was until much later. It wasn't just that one night. It wasn't just the knives or the screaming or the threats. It was years of instability, years of being used as emotional pawns in her battles, years of walking on eggshells. The thing that sticks with me the most is how powerless I felt, even as I grew older. I think that's what makes it so hard to shake, knowing that I as a child had so little agency, so little ability to escape or protect myself from what was happening. Every time she screamed at us, every time she manipulated us, I felt like I was trapped in a maze I couldn't get out of. And now, even as an adult, I sometimes feel that same suffocating pressure, even though I'm physically removed from her. There's also the guilt. I feel guilty for not stopping my brother from fetching the knife. I feel guilty for not being stronger, for not understanding that we were all victims in that moment. But at the time, I couldn't see it that way. I just wanted the screaming to stop. I just wanted the fear to go away. And I guess I convinced myself that by following her commands, I could somehow make it all stop. Maybe if we just did what she wanted, she'd calm down. But that's not how it works, is it? That's not how abuse works. I've since tried to distance myself from her as much as I can. I don't have a relationship with her anymore, not in the way that people would expect a mother and child to have. It's a strange thing to navigate. This idea that she's my mother, and I'm supposed to love her, but she never really loved me in the way that I needed. And I guess I've spent years trying to unlearn what she taught me about love, about manipulation, about fear. I think that's the hardest part of all this, learning to trust my own instincts, learning to separate what's real from what's been twisted by years of emotional abuse. There are still moments when I question my own feelings, moments when I wonder if I'm overreacting or if I'm still carrying around too much bitterness. But then I remember nights like that one, and I remember the fear, the anxiety, the helplessness, and I realized that it wasn't me who was wrong, it was her. I'm still working through it, still trying to heal. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to fully let go of what she put me through. But I do know this. I'm getting better at taking care of myself, at creating boundaries, at refusing to accept behavior that isn't healthy. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm finally in control of my own story. Thanks to everyone who shared their own stories or gave me support after my last post. It's been comforting to hear from others who have experienced similar pain and to know I'm not alone in this. It's taken me a while to come back here and post an update. It's been a long road, but I think I've reached a point where I can finally close this chapter. This will be the final update. A lot has happened since that night, and even more since my last post. I've done a lot of healing, but also a lot of confronting. For a long time, I carried a lot of shame and confusion about that night, and about my childhood in general. It took years of therapy, conversations with other people who grew up in similar situations, and a lot of self-reflection to untangle the web of guilt and fear that I had wrapped around myself. The first thing I learned is that it wasn't my fault. I wasn't responsible for her actions, and I wasn't the one who caused the chaos and pain. I was a kid, just trying to survive, just trying to figure out how to keep the peace. That guilt I carried for so long, guilt about not stopping my brother from getting the knife, guilt about not saying no to her, guilt about not being strong enough. It's taken time, but I finally let it go. It wasn't my job to fix her, and it wasn't my fault that she couldn't see how badly she was hurting us. I was a child in an impossible situation, and there was no way I could have fixed it. The second thing I've learned is how much I underestimated the long-term effects of emotional abuse. For years, I thought that once I moved away from her, once I physically distanced myself from her, everything would get better. But it didn't. The trauma, the fear, the anxiety, it followed me into adulthood. It colored every relationship I had, every decision I made. Trust was difficult. Intimacy was even harder. I was constantly looking for signs of manipulation, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's only been in the past couple of years that I've really begun to recognize the ways in which I was still living in the shadow of that childhood, and how much I was still allowing her to control my life from a distance. I've cut ties with my mother. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of painful conversations, but I had to. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the guilt trips, they never stopped, even as I got older. Even after I left home, she still tried to make me feel responsible for her well-being, still tried to make me her emotional crutch. But no matter how much I tried to give, no matter how much I tried to be there for her, she never could be the mother I needed. She couldn't even be the mother I deserved. I tried for years to make her love me the way I wanted, but in the end, I realized that love doesn't work like that. It shouldn't be a constant struggle for approval, and it shouldn't come with strings attached. I deserve peace, and I finally accepted that peace meant cutting ties with someone who would never be able to give me what I needed. I've also learned how important it is to set boundaries. Healthy boundaries, something I didn't understand at all as a child. I spent most of my life letting people walk all over me, especially in relationships, because that's what I had learned to expect from my mom. But I'm learning now how to protect my own well-being, how to say no without feeling like I have to apologize for it. It's been empowering to start taking control of my life in ways I never could before. I've surrounded myself with people who truly care about me, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm capable of real, healthy connections. I've started opening up to friends and partners in a way that I never could before, and it's scary, but also incredibly freeing. I still struggle with trust sometimes, and sometimes I have to remind myself that not everyone will treat me the way my mother did, but I'm getting better at recognizing that and being kind to myself in those moments. I don't want to pretend that everything is perfect now, or that I've moved on completely, because healing isn't linear. There are still moments when I feel triggered, when I hear something that brings me back to that fear, to that chaos. But I'm stronger now. I'm better equipped to handle those moments, and I've learned to love myself in a way I never did before. To everyone who reached out after my previous post, thank you. Your support meant the world to me. I never realized how many people had experienced similar pain, and reading your comments, your stories, your kind words, it helped me feel less alone. I'm finally at a point where I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I'm no longer bound by the fear or the guilt that once held me captive. I've created my own future, and it's one that is mine. I'm writing my own story now. So this is the final update. I'm okay, I'm healing, and I'm free. Thank you all for being a part of this journey with me.